most relevant to the geographic location of the user. Let's take a closer look at B2C e-commerce and some different subtypes. So we have services available. Example there is Shutterfly. You can get your pictures printed and put on mugs and calendars and so forth. Services include complex services like having flights, hotels, rent-a-cars combined into a purchase, like Expedia. E-tailers are just simply stores, examples like Best Buy, Intel computers. Another category is portals, and portals are websites that try to be your portal, your entry point to either surfing, purchasing things on the web, or something more specific like, for example, this is Yahoo. Yahoo has a general portal site. This is its tech site, and it tries to be the starting off point for looking for different news in tech, making purchases, things like that. This next example is the State of Indiana website, and so it's your portal to anything that you would have to do with the state of Indiana government, whether it's looking up different laws, whether it is paying for a parking ticket, lots of different services available through the portal site at the state of Indiana. And most of us are not unfamiliar with doing some content viewing on Netflix. Other examples, Hulu, Amazon Prime, consuming music like Spotify, Apple Music, and so forth. We're going to introduce some of the chapters that we're going to talk about a little bit later in the course. So we're going to go through this kind of quickly because Chapter 3 is going to talk about the Internet. So the Internet is a worldwide network of computer networks and built on a common standards, and we'll talk about those. It is TCP/IP, and then also the standard of HTML. Created in the late 1960s. And some of the services on the Internet include the World Wide Web. So the World Wide Web is part of the Internet. Also includes email, file transfers, and real-time chat, bulletin board services, and a bunch of other parts of the Internet. We typically measure the Internet by the number of hosts, and we can kind of think of these as different websites. And like we mentioned earlier, we'll cover this in much more detail in Chapter 3. So the most important part for business of the Internet is the World Wide Web. So let's talk briefly about that. This is the most popular and widely used portion of the Internet. It was developed in the 1990s, and it was developed by Tim Berners-Lee at the CERN laboratory in Europe. They have the largest super particle accelerator, super collider, something like that, and he developed the World Wide Web there. The official definition of the World Wide Web is the multimedia hyperlink portion of the Internet. You can see we've got the example on the side. What the World Wide Web is that little thin slice of blue up at the top, and that is places like Amazon, doing Google searches, Wikipedia, all exists up there. The deep web, which is considerably larger, is, you can think of it as the password protected parts of the Internet. So that would include things like DePaul, D2L, subscription sites that you have to pay for, that you can't just get into, that you have to have a account name and password. So things like Netflix is part of the deep web, and that sliced down at the bottom, is called the dark web, and that's where the somewhat unsavory things happen on the Internet, whether it might be purchasing drugs or other things that happen down there. That's done with anonymous browsers like the Tor browser. Virtual private networks, VPNs, are also used in the dark web. probably the last significant milestone in e-commerce is the development of the smartphone, and we'll refer to that as a mobile platform, mobile e-commerce. And we know that we can get to the internet with our 4G connections, and these include our devices like our tablets and phablets, smartphones, and lightweight laptops. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is talk about the history of e-commerce, how it developed. This is the timeline we're going to use, but before we talk about these three different phases, we're going to talk about some of the precursors to e-commerce. The first kind of foray into e-commerce was with companies like Baxter Healthcare. They had different ways to order things via telephone, email. They used electronic data interchange to place orders, but it wasn't done with the ubiquity of the internet. It was more done through phone lines. There's a company called French Minitel, which is their phone company, and they had this device which was a phone combination monitor and keyboard. It worked through the phone lines. It did, among other things, automate the yellow pages, the looking up of different businesses, and it would charge some kind of a fee for every time it made that kind of connection. The real beginning of e-commerce was when we had websites and we started selling advertisements in the form of banners and eventually annoying things like pop-ups. So here's how we're going to talk about this. We'll talk about the three different phases, and so that's the invention, consolidation, reinvention, and then we'll give you some examples of the kinds of things that were going on. We'll take a look at the inflection points that happened in 2000 and 2007. So let's start with the invention phase. Now, that's going to be characterized by retail products, and this is going to be what we'll call simple products, so things like books and CDs and DVDs. The connections we had at the time, and you can try to roll back the time to the mid-1990s and having things like your dial-up modems and how long it took to even download a medium resolution picture took a while. So certainly things like MP3s and full HD videos were really out of the question at that time. Some of the things that fueled e-commerce in the incredible .com bubble is the friction-free commerce, where the rental and overhead and insurance of having a brick and mortar establishment just wasn't going to be there, and so a lot of things like having cashiers, having employees, and all of that were just not part of the business model, and that was really really attractive to a lot of people. And with the amount of venture capital that was available at the time, there were startups left, right, and center. Also, the lure of being a first mover and really maintaining that and keeping that momentum through the upcoming stages of development and the increase in e-commerce. And then that really led to the .com crash of 2000. So here's a couple of old school website screen caps. This is eToys, and you can see the design and layout here. Certainly different from the kinds of layouts that we use today. So the inflection point that really occurred after the invention phase, right around 2000, is the .com bubble burst, or the crash. And this just occurred because the business model and the performance of the new startups were just not sustainable. There were companies, and the amount of e-commerce business was just not significant enough to keep those businesses afloat. So that really thinned out the amount of players, and that led to the consolidation phase, and that's where we have retail, and then we added services. So The emphasis here was on let's get back to basics. Let's make sure we're running a business and sound business practices, and just to make sure that we were running a good business first, and then taking advantage of the technology secondly. Large firms, Walmart and Sears and Kmart began e-commerce, or what we now know is a bricks and clicks strategy. The venture capital funds just kind of disappeared because there just wasn't enough successful businesses, and the risks were too great given the dot-com bubble crash of 2000. We did begin selling more complex products and services, so not just simply things like books and CDs, but electronics and computers and other items like that. And this is really when search engine advertising started, and we're going to spend a chapter later on in the course talking about search engines, how they monetize that search engine service, and also how to design websites in light of search engine algorithms. Some examples of companies that made it out of the first phase, invention, and made it into consolidation, and even through till today. Priceline, eBay, Shutterfly, and of course Amazon. And that really leads us to the next and current phase called reinvention, and that was characterized by the advent of the smartphone in 2007. So this really focuses on one part of web development called Web 2.0. Just FYI, Web 1.0 is the original static, just information, very little interactivity of the web, to Web 2.0, which is including user-generated content through social sites like certainly Facebook, but also YouTube and others, and using applications, and that is to do things like make purchases and so forth. Web 3.0 is not part of this model, but just for the sake of completeness, has to do with the semantic web, and that just means instead of having just text on a web page, we give meaning to the text. Like, for example, we might include something like a name, and then inside the tag we'll say that's first name or last name or price or item number, and it gives meaning to the information. Alright, so let's get back to some of the key factors in the reinvention phase, also including mobile platforms with smartphones, local commerce, and that is based on location, and obviously having a smartphone and the location settings there lead to idea of where the person is, and to serve them up the appropriate ads for businesses in that area. And obviously the content, and so this is going to include the things like Netflix and Amazon Prime, movies and TV, Hulu. Alright, lastly we'll talk a little bit about different academic disciplines that have to do with e-commerce. The technical approach, so this is kind of the nerd side of the disciplines. That's going to be computer science, management science, information systems, and so that's going to be primarily taught in a computer science school like DePaul's CDM. And then the behavioral approach, information systems, and notice how that appears on both sides. So that would be like an MIS degree here at the business school, and that would include a little bit of the technical side, so certainly databases, a little bit of programming and so forth, but also a business fundamental education. Then economics, marketing, management, finance, accounting, and also sociology to some extent. The point being that it's really hard to find a place where the e-commerce hasn't really had an effect, especially with respect to a business school.